Let's talk about how the conversation of pay in offices is and at jobs is still very much something that's a little taboo to talk about with your coworkers. Sometimes it's talked about very secretly, sometimes it's not talked about at all. But unequal pay remains one of the most persistent issues in the workplace. And I'm going to bring on our next guest right now, Marjorie Messidor. She's an attorney and founding partner of her law firm. Thank you so much for joining me. We appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So, as I just mentioned, the topic of pay is kind of a taboo topic for some people in the office. So, if you're in a situation where you're wondering, how am I getting paid, compared to the rest of my colleagues who are in the same role as I am? What are some of the most common signs that employees could watch for?
Well, definitely one of the main and most objective signs that employees could really watch for is looking around to see who has similar titles, who has similar levels of experience than they do. Having discussions regarding pay is something that I galvanize and encourage. It's something that is protected by law, so that if you do decide to discuss your pay with your colleagues and employees, it's not something that you can otherwise be punished for. And it's something that really equitizes and makes it such that it's balanced and fair. One of the main imbalances is a imbalance that exists between the way that men are paid and the way that women are paid for the same position and for the same work. But the conversation regarding those compensations is usually what really moves the needle on getting it more balanced and equitized.
Yeah, and many people are uncomfortable having those conversations about pay at work. So, why does that silence or hesitation to discuss it make pay inequality harder to address?
It makes it really harder to address because you don't know what you don't know. Until people start openly talking about how much are you getting? What does your package look like? Do you have, what kind of clauses do you have in your contract? Then it's really hard to compare and contrast because all the only metric that you have is your own experience. But when you hear about what others are having and the many opportunities or many perks, both monetary and non-monetary, right? That can come in that can come in compensation in your work, then you have a good measure as to how you measure up with others. States like New York that have pay transparency acts where they have to put the range of pay in every post of a job, it becomes a little bit easier to address these pay issues, but that's unfortunately not a nationwide stance regarding the pay transparency.
And you've worked on discrimination cases as an attorney across many different industries. Are there certain workplaces where these pay gaps tend to show up more than others?
There are definitely workplaces where these pay gaps show up more than others. Generally, you'll find that in a lot of finance type of positions or positions that are related to sales and the like, you'll find really big pay discrepancies in terms of how it's done. In more traditional positions, medical, doctors, lawyers, there seems to be less of a gap. A gap still does exist, but less of a gap because generally it is done by graduation year, class, etc. when you're working at, let's say, a firm or you're working at a hospital.
And let's say you do end up having a conversation with your colleague who's in the same position or same job title as you, and you end up realizing that you both have different pay. When does that cross the line into illegal discrimination?
So one of the things that you can definitely look for is when you're speaking to another colleagues, just to look at, compare and contrast your duties and responsibilities. Sometimes people have the same titles, but they just don't have the same, area of duties and responsibilities or sphere of influence in their respective roles. Other things that may be important is if they're in the same location. Obviously, a pay in New York City may be very, very different someplace like in DC or maybe down south. And then lastly, the thing that you want to look for is you want to look at the level of experience and the type of experience that you have. But if all of those things match up and you're doing the same job in the same place, the same work, and you have the same level of experience, but you have drastically different pay, then that is something that you definitely want to flag for HR so that you can get an explanation as to why that is.
And are you ever seeing employers rely on someone's past salary history when deciding what to pay them?
That actually is something that was relatively commonplace. When you're interviewing for a job, they'll ask for your salary history so that they can have a sense of where you are monetary wise to make sure that the job that you're applying for can fall into that category or not. It has now become illegal in places like New York to ask for such pay history because what they're finding is that it just perpetuates further more of the pay gap.
And for anybody listening, if they suspected they were being underpaid at work, what should they do first before maybe going to their employer or boss directly?
You definitely want to do a little bit of research. There are all sorts of websites and resources that'll tell you what pay ranges are for your level of experience, for the type of job that you are in the city that you are. Speaking to other people who are in the industry just to get a sense of what packages are looking like. You want to do your research and you want to make sure that when you go in to ask the questions of why am I being compensated this way, that you have enough research such that you can advocate for yourself if they start to give you responses that really don't make sense to you. So if you know that particular individuals from your school, your graduating class, or who have worked on your kind of projects are being paid at a particular level, having done that research and having that empirical data will be invaluable when you start speaking and advocating for yourself to really rebalance that pay.
Yeah, and if you are starting to notice that pay disparity, I mean, what's the best way to document this so that you can potentially, back up your claim if it is proven that there is a pay disparity down the line?
Sure, definitely you want to keep records of any job postings, particularly those that give salary ranges, as part of that pay transparency that I spoke to you about. The other information is that if somebody does share with you some of their pay and compensation, particularly around bonus time and in accordance with their ratings, keeping copious notes of what those things are is also a good way to keep those things documented so that again, when you get into the opportunity to possibly advocate for yourself, you have other things that you can point to so that they can reconcile the discrepancy.
And salary transparency is, becoming a bigger conversation. We've seen certain states when job listings are posted online, there's a pay range listed, right?
Right.
Can those open pay ranges actually help prevent discrimination? I mean, what does that do for people who are applying for jobs?
I mean, more than anything, it makes the issue of pay, it puts it out right in front and center. It was very common before that people would sit down for interviews and they would have an idea about what the job would pay, or they would have an expectation of what the job would pay, but they until they were actually given an offer, and sometimes people would get unpleasant surprises as to what it was that what they were offering for that particular job. So what it does is it puts the issue really out on Front Street so that people can make it the educated determination as to whether or not this is something that they believe is worth their time or they're otherwise qualified and aligned with.
And looking at the taking legal action route, I mean, that can seem really intimidating to some employees. So, what protections exist right now for people to come forward about pay discrimination?
Sure. So any type of discrimination or actually any discussion surrounding around pay or what we call protected activities, that means the law protects your ability to discuss, to complain, or otherwise seek information regarding discrimination and your pay, and you cannot be punished for it. And what I mean by punished for it is more than just being fired. You cannot be demoted, you can't be taken off the more valuable and better projects. Your salary or your wages cannot be decreased as a result of asking those questions. So by having that protection, the hope is that others will be encouraged to have those discussions openly and honestly without fear of any sort of retaliation.
And in your practice as an attorney, I know I'm sure that discrimination is wide ranging. Is there any specific gender or any demographic or thing, any factor you think that um, maybe has you've seen more people be discriminated against than others?
Certainly, there are certain demographics that tend to be more discriminated against than others. Women in particular, because on top of gender, they can also be discriminated against on race, and then they can also be discriminated against on pregnancy and pregnancy-related type of situations and ailments and disability. So women in general are probably amongst the most discriminated against demographic that exists.
Pay just I might just repeat that for viewers watching right now who feel like something about their pay just doesn't add up. What message do you want them to hear today?
Definitely, if they feel like it doesn't add up, I encourage you to do your research and I encourage you to ask the bold questions so that you can get an answer.
Thank you so much. Again, such a tough but important conversation to have. And I know this issue is super prevalent. So, once again, we really appreciate you, Marjorie, for coming on. That's his attorney, Marjorie Mesidor. Thank you so much.